a widow dressed in crimson, and a trail of secrets stained the same shade. Welcome to Mystery Files. I am your host, Raven. Tell me where you're listening from. Your words keep this community thriving. Now let's begin. It is with some hesitation that I put pen to paper regarding the singular affair which the public, in its fondness for a lurid epithet, has already christened the case of the Crimson Widow. My reluctance springs not from any fear of the consequences of disclosure, for the principal actors are now beyond the reach of earthly censure, but from the knowledge that in the telling I must once again confess my own dullness beside the extraordinary clarity of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. The events occurred in the latter part of October, in that year when a gritty fog lay for days together over London, pressing against the very panes of our sitting-room in Baker Street, as though the city itself desired to peer into our domestic hearth. Holmes had been in one of those reflective moods which alternated with his periods of feverish activity. For 3 mornings he had not once touched his violin. His chemical apparatus was idle. His pipe remained cold upon the mantel-shelf. He lounged upon the sofa with his long, nervous hands clasped, his keen grey eyes fixed upon a stain in the ceiling which had, I am sure, long ago ceased to offer novelty. I had returned from my rounds late on the previous evening, and found him thus, to my relief, for I knew too well the other condition in which idleness might have found him. The morning had passed in quiet companionship. Quiet, that is, on my part, for Holmes was never truly silent. I have learned that when my friend appears to muse upon nothing, he is in truth pursuing some chain of thought, whose beginning and end are equally obscured to me. He roused at length in that abrupt fashion which always made me feel that I had been left standing while he travelled a mile and returned. "You have been to the river," said he. I stared at him, for I had scarcely spoken since entering the room. "To the river? I have not been there in a week." "Not upon your heels, perhaps," he returned languidly, "but upon your mind. There is a faint scent of wet wool about your coat cuff, and a smear of grey silt upon the right knee of your trousers. You knelt upon a stone embankment. Your left boot is free of it, therefore you knelt with the right knee only, and you did so recently enough that the silt has not dried to powder. The Thames is kept low this week by the tides. I infer you were there this morning." "My dear Holmes." "Observe further," he continued, with that little smile which showed his enjoyment, "that you have in your pocket a letter folded with uncommon care, and yet you have twice touched it unconsciously since you sat down. It is not from a patient, else you would have opened it at once. It is not from a creditor, else you would have hidden it from yourself. It is from some lady, and you dread or desire its contents. Your pulse quickens whenever your fingers approach it." "You are insufferable," I cried, half laughing, for indeed he had in a breath laid bare what I would not willingly have had any man know. "If I have a letter, what of it?" Nothing, said he, waving a hand. "It is my vocation to notice what others do not. Your letter may contain poetry, profanity, or pastry cook's bills. All are equally uninteresting to me, but your river silt is another matter. You have been to the embankment because your thoughts were troubled, and because you sought air. And you sought air because I have been oppressive this week." "Holmes!" I protested. He stretched like a cat in the sun. "My dear fellow, I would not have you wear your heart out in dodging the obvious. You are unsettled. You have been glancing at the door every quarter of an hour. You expect a visitor." Before I could reply, there came precisely such a visitor as he had predicted, but the manner of her entrance and the look upon her face displaced at once all a lighter talk. Mrs. Hudson, breathless with urgency, showed her in without the customary preliminaries. The lady who came was not young, that is to say, She had passed the brilliant early flower of youth, but she had retained that indefinable carriage which proclaims breeding even under distress. Her gown was of deep mourning, of excellent cloth, but hastily arranged, and there was a disordered quality in her veil as though she had put it on with trembling fingers. She carried in her gloved hand a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. Holmes was on his feet in an instant. The listlessness had fallen from him like a slouched skin, his face animated, his eyes bright, his whole figure alert and courteous. "Pray take this chair, madam. You are in trouble. I am Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and this is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson. You have come to consult me, I presume, upon a matter of crime?" The lady sank into the chair he had offered, and pressed her hand to her throat, as if to still the beating there. "Yes," she whispered. "I do not know where else to turn. They say you, oh, Mr. Holmes, they say you see through darkness." Holmes's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Not through it, madam, but within it." "You are Lady Violet St. Clare?" She looked up sharply. "How in heaven's name—" "The faint trace of red clay on your skirt is characteristic of the carriageway at St. Clare House. Your veil bears a pin of jet carved in the family pattern. 3 lilies with a broken stem. You have been weeping, but not long enough for the skin around your eyes to swell, which means the blow has come upon you quickly. Besides, your card, which you attempted to conceal under your glove when you rose from the cab." He touched the small pasteboard partly visible by her wrist. A faint colour came into her pale cheeks, whether of surprise or a momentary relief, I could not say. "Yes, I am Violet St. Clare." "Then your husband is Sir Alistair St. Clare, baronet and member for West Brixton, a man of some standing. You fear, therefore, to involve the ordinary machinery of the law." Lady Violet shivered. "You speak as if you knew already." "Sir Alistair is dead, Mr. Holmes." The words were spoken quietly, yet the room seemed to chill with them. I moved instinctively towards her, for the physician in me was alarmed at the grey drownness in her face. "Dead," repeated Holmes. He said no more, but his eyes, those merciless, pitiful eyes, fixed themselves upon her as a lantern fixes upon a dark corner. "Yes, he was found this morning, in my private sitting-room. They say it is murder?" Holmes did not start, nor did his voice rise. His restraint at such times was always to me more impressive than any dramatic exclamation. "Will you tell me precisely what occurred?" said he. She drew a long breath as one who must dive into cold water. "At 7 o'clock this morning," she began, "my maid, Hannah, came to assist me. She found me in a faint upon the floor. It is a shameful thing to confess, but I remember little between leaving my room last night and waking to her cries. She says my hair was loose and my hand stained. I had a pain in my head, as though struck with a hammer. When I could stand, I went at once to my sitting-room. Alistair's room adjoins it. And there, oh God, there was blood everywhere. There was blood on the wall, on the rug, on the very bell-pull, and in the chair by the fire, where he always sat to read. He was slumped forward, his head fallen to one side. The skin of his temple opened, and his face—" her voice broke, his face so grey and astonished, like a man who had seen a ghost. I saw Holmes's fingers tighten together. "You say blood on the wall?" "Yes." A spatter, as if something had been dashed across it. "But there was no weapon, none at all, only this." She took the object wrapped in her handkerchief and held it out. Holmes accepted it with a care which told me it might have been a diamond or a morsel of ash. He unfolded the cloth. In his palm lay a curious thing, a tiny piece of lace, perhaps 2 inches square, and at its centre a drop of dark red, so deep in colour that at first glance I thought it black. Even at a distance, the eye was drawn to it with a kind of ugly fascination. Holmes brought it to the light by the window. "Blood," said he softly, "and lace from a lady's garment." Lady Violet nodded miserably. It was clutched in his left hand. His fingers were so stiff I could scarcely pry it out. "The police took everything else, but I hid this. I did not know what it meant, but I know it matters." "You were right to bring it." Holmes replaced it gently in the handkerchief and laid it on the table. "Now, madam, you said no weapon was found. How, then, did he die?" Her eyes widened. "They say he was struck, but there was only that wound at the temple, no knife, no pistol. The hearth tongs were in their place, the poker untouched. The servants were questioned, yet none heard a sound. It is a great house, Mr. Holmes, but walls do not swallow a scream. Alistair was not a timid man." "And when did you last see your husband alive?" "Near 10 o'clock last night. We had quarrelled. Oh, I cannot deny it. We quarrelled bitterly. I left him in his room." She pressed her hands together as though in prayer. "Mr. Holmes, you must believe me. Whatever I said in anger, I did not harm him. I could not." Holmes's manner softened. "The question is not yet one of belief, Lady Violet, but of fact. Your maid found you upon the floor at 7. You remember leaving Sir Alistair at 10. You have a pain in your head, loose hair, and stained hands. You are, indeed, the prime suspect in your own house." She flinched as if struck. "Do you, too, think it was I?" "My dear lady, I think nothing until I know. Tell me of your household. Who else slept at St. Clare House last night?" "There is our steward, Mr. Brackett, Hannah, my maid, 2 footmen, cook, and my husband's secretary, Mr. Lionel Graves. Besides them, there is Captain Hugh Kettering, an old friend of Alistair's from the Afghan days, who has been our guest these 3 weeks." At the mention of the name, Holmes's eyes gleamed for an instant, but he said only, "I have heard of Captain Kettering." "A decorated officer. And Mr. Graves?" "A quiet man, earnest. He has been with my husband 2 years. He is devoted to his work." "And any other visitor? A carriage at night? A ring at the bell? A stranger seen upon the grounds?" Lady Violet shook her head. "None that I know of, but I was in my room after 10, and She hesitated, swallowing. "I fear I am not well enough to swear to what I might have heard." Holmes rose and walked to the fire, standing with his back to it, his head bowed, his jaw set in that way I knew so well. When he spoke again, his voice was as crisp as the air outside. "Has Scotland Yard been informed?" "Yes." Inspector Lestrade came within the hour. He was kind, more kind than I deserved. But I could see what he thought. Lestrade is honest, if occasionally hasty. He will follow the straight line that presents itself. This matter is not straight. It will require a certain delicacy. He turned, and I saw now in full the transformation in him. The languor of 10 minutes ago seemed a lifetime distant. He was all lithe purpose, as though the very puzzle had fed him. "Lady Violet," said he, "you have done wisely to come here at once. If you will allow me, Dr. Watson and I will accompany you to St. Clare House. We shall see what may be seen before others have trampled it down. I ask only that you answer truthfully everything I ask, even if it pains you." "I will answer anything," she cried. "Anything if you can clear this horror from my name." Holmes bowed. "Then let us lose no time." As we made our preparations, I could not help but glance again at the little scrap of lace upon the table. It lay innocent enough in its folded cloth, yet I felt, with a gathering certainty, that we had been handed not merely a clue, but the first thread in some intricate tapestry of deceit. Outside, the fog thickened, muffling the clatter of hooves and giving to Baker Street that air of secrecy which always seemed to suit Holmes's trade. Within, my friend moved with quiet speed, his mind already ahead upon the track. What we were to find at St. Clare House, what shadows waited behind its gilt doors, none of us then guessed. But I remember thinking, as our hansom turned towards the river and the grey morning swallowed us, that we were driving not to a mere domestic tragedy, but to one of those rarer mysteries wherein the obvious is a mask, and the truth, when it comes, cuts deeper than any knife. The drive to West Brixton was a silent one, save for the creak of the cab springs and the distant smothered roar of the waking city. Lady Violet sat opposite us with her veil lowered, her hands locked together in her lap so tightly that the knuckles shone white through the black kid. Holmes, sunk into his corner, had drawn his collar high and let his eyelids droop to narrow slits, yet I knew, by the set of his mouth and the curious stillness of his posture, that he was alert to every sound without and every breath within. St. Clare House stood back from the road behind iron railings and a sweep of autumnal lawn. Even through the fog, one felt its breadth and dignity, a sombre pile of stone with high windows that stared blankly into the grey. A constable at the gates touched his helmet to Lady Violet and to Holmes with an air of recognition, for the inspector had doubtless carried his name before him. We had scarcely mounted the wide steps when the door was opened by a man who might have stepped from a portrait of a faithful servant, thin, erect, and silver-haired with a grave, respectful face. Yet there was a tremor about his mouth which told of inward perturbation. "Mr. Holmes, I am Brackett, the steward. Her ladyship—" He broke off, for the sight of Violet's drawn face checked his speech. "You are most welcome, sir. Inspector Lestrade is within." Holmes nodded and entered without waiting for more ceremony. The hall received us with that cool, muffled quiet peculiar to great houses in mourning. The heavy carpet deadened our tread, and the long mirrors on either side reflected our figures like ghosts moving in a sepulchre. Somewhere in the upper part of the house a woman was sobbing steadily, with the same rhythm as a wind in a chimney. Lestrade met us at the foot of the staircase. He was a compact, brisk figure, with the neat beard and sharp eyes I had known in a dozen cases. If his face bore an expression of sympathy for the lady, it bore also the obstinate professional resentment he never wholly concealed when another mind was called in to assist his own. "Good morning, Mr. Holmes," said he. "You've been sent for, I see. I don't blame her ladyship. It's a ugly business, ugly." Holmes shook the inspector's hand warmly enough, but his gaze had already slid past him to the left corridor. "You have not altered the room?" he asked. "Nothing has been touched since the surgeon and I had our look round. We've kept every soul out but the necessary people. It's here." Lady Violet swayed at the doorway, and I put my arm for a moment beneath her elbow, but she mastered herself and led on. The private sitting-room lay at the back of the house, overlooking a little garden where bare branches combed the fog. A fire had died to a core of red ash behind the grate. The curtains were half drawn, so that the daylight seeped in weak and colourless. The first thing that struck me was the air of violence which clung about the place. A Persian rug had been shifted from its square, and one corner was soaked so darkly that it might have been a patch of ink. Upon the right wall, a foot or two above the skirting, there was indeed a spattered fan of blood, as if some wet brush had been flicked hard across the plaster. The armchair by the fire sat in the position of command a reader might choose, and in it, still as a thing carved from wax, was Sir Alistair St. Clare. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in the late 50s, with hair iron grey at the temples and a heavy moustache. Death had not softened, but rather fixed the power in his features. The brow was contracted, the lips set apart a little in surprise. On the left temple was a wound such as a blunt object might make, an ugly, caved bruise torn open at its centre. Blood had dried in a stiffening line down the cheek and into the collar of the nightshirt. One hand had fallen to the side of the chair. The other lay upon the lap, curled as though it had but lately relaxed. I could not help recalling the scrap of lace which Lady Violet had brought, but the hand was now empty. Holmes went straight to the body until Lestrade's obvious annoyance began his inspection without a word. He knelt first beside the chair, and I observed that his attention fixed itself not so much on the wound as on the distribution of the blood. He bent close, his nose almost grazing the fabric of the armchair, then shifted to the rug, and from thence to the wall spatter, comparing their relation as a mathematician compares figures. Presently he stood, crossed to the window, and drew aside the curtain a further hand's breadth. Then he returned to the hearth and thrust the poker among the ashes. "You've had the surgeon already?" he asked at length. "Yes, Dr. Hatherley. He says death was instantaneous. Blow fractured the skull. Time of death between 10 and midnight." Holmes nodded as if that were expected. "Any sign of a struggle?" "Not much. Some disorder on the rug. No furniture upset. No bruising on the man's arms besides the head wound. He may have been struck from behind with no warning." Holmes moved to a small writing table near the wall. Upon it were a blotter, a fountain pen, and some loose papers. He did not touch them, he only looked. I saw his eyes flick to an envelope among the papers, then to the wastebasket beside the desk. He drew out a pair of long forceps from his pocket and lifted from the basket the charred remains of something burnt. He did not examine it in the room. He slipped it quietly into a little tin case. Lestrade cleared his throat. "There's another matter, Mr. Holmes. We found the lady, begging your pardon, your ladyship, outside her bedroom door. There was a bruise on the back of her head. Her maid swears she heard nothing in the night, but the appearance, well, it looks like a blow." Holmes's head came round sharply. "A bruise? So where precisely?" "Low on the occiput. She's dazed, poor soul. She doesn't remember." Holmes's gaze rested on Violet for an instant, not accusing, but intent, as though he would read in her face a whole hidden chapter. "May I see your injury, madam, if it is not too distressing?" With a faint shiver she lifted her veil and turned her head. I stepped closer in my professional capacity. There was a swelling at the base of the skull, tender and discoloured. A sharp blow with something smooth, perhaps the corner of a book or a weighted fist, could have made it. The hair about it was slightly clotted as if blood had oozed and dried. Holmes did not touch the wound. He leaned nearer, merely to observe the position and angle. Then, rather to my surprise, he asked, "Was your hair pinned when you went to bed?" "Yes, I always pin it. Hannah lets it down." "And yet it was loose at 7. "Yes, she told me so." Holmes made no comment. He stepped to the door, looked at the lock, and then at the floor. I followed his eyes. Near the threshold, on the carpet, was a faint smudge. Too faint for Lestrade to notice at a glance, but to my eyes it seemed a narrow track of something dried and rusty brown, half wiped away as though by a cautious foot. Holmes's nostrils quivered. He stooped, touched the stain lightly with his finger, and brought it close to the light. "Blood," he murmured, not for our ears, but for his own. Then, raising his voice a shade, "Inspector, who first entered this room?" "The footman, Carter. Her ladyship rang, and he came with me at once." "And before him?" "No one." Brackett unlocks all the doors each morning, but this one was found unfastened. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Unfastened. That's right. Not forced, just unlatched. Holmes turned to the steward, who had hovered in the background like a shadow of propriety. Mr. Brackett, does Sir Alister commonly leave this door unlatched at night? Never, sir. His lordship was particular. He believed, if I may say, in the security of his papers. He would lock it even when stepping down to dinner. Indeed. Holmes's voice held nothing, but the little lift of his brows told me he had pocketed the fact. At that instant, we heard a sound from the corridor, soft footsteps and a measured tap like a stick upon the floor. A man entered with Lestrade behind him. He was large and dark, with the straight, soldierly carriage of one who has commanded men. His moustache drooped in heavy lines. His left hand bore the faint stiffening of an old wound. He wore a plain morning suit, but there was a martial severity in his face which no civilian cloth could quite disguise. "Captain Kettering," said Lestrade, "this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes." The captain bowed with stiff courtesy. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like a man who has not slept. "I have heard of you, Mr. Holmes," said he. "I only wish your name had not been needed here." Holmes regarded him with that polite indifference which yet misses no detail. "You were a friend of Sir Alister's?" "For 20 years we served together. I was in his room until near 11 last night." He seemed troubled. He spoke of receiving a letter that morning, something that vexed him. He would not say more. "When I left him, he was alive." "Did you hear any sound during the night?" "None. I slept like the dead, God forgive the phrase. I woke to the commotion." Holmes inclined his head. "You mentioned a letter. Do you know from whom?" The captain's jaw tightened. "No, I saw only that he thrust it into his coat with anger. He was not a man to show his private affairs." Holmes's eyes drifted as if by chance towards the writing table again. "Nor yet to burn them in his own hearth, I fancy." He said it very quietly, and Kettering did not appear to hear. But Lestrade glanced sharply to Holmes, and I could see in the inspector's face the unwilling acknowledgement that my friend had cited something worth noting. Holmes walked back to the chair and stood looking down upon the dead man. "Captain, did Sir Alister keep any weapon in this room? A cane, perhaps?" "A sword stick in the umbrella stand outside. Nothing here." "And there was no strange visitor at the house?" "Not that I know. Brackett would have told me." Holmes's gaze flicked to Brackett, and the old servant stiffened as though he had received a silent order. With a little sigh, Holmes drew out his lens again and bent once more to the rug, tracing with a quick, delicate eye the faint scuffs and lines about the chair. His mind, I could feel, was already assembling the night's invisible movements into a pattern which we others could scarcely glimpse. And as I watched him there in the dim room with the fog pressing close against the panes, I had the unsettling sense that the very house was holding its breath for the direction his finger would point. Holmes remained upon his knee for several minutes longer, so motionless that one might have thought his mind had deserted his body. Only the little precise movements of his lens over the carpet and the occasional tightening of his lips betrayed the rapid work behind his calm exterior. Lestrade, impatient by nature, paced once or twice upon the hearthstone, and then halted, evidently unwilling to interrupt. Lady Violet had sunk into a chair by the door, her face half hidden by her veil. Captain Kettering stood rigid with clasped hands, staring at the dead man with the fixed gaze of one who restrains himself by force. At length Holmes straightened, replaced his lens, and rose to his feet with a slight stiffening of the back. "Inspector," said he, "you will oblige me by letting no one enter or leave the house for the next hour." Lestrade bristled. "We've already posted men at the doors." "Excellent. Tighten them. It is possible that the person we seek is still within your net. You will not mind my giving the order. You have asked my help." The inspector coloured a little at the rebuke, but nodded. "Very good. I'll see to it." Holmes' eyes followed him to the door. When Lestrade had gone, he turned to the steward. "Mr. Brackett, kindly show me the arrangement of the rooms on this floor. In particular, I should like to see Sir Alister's bedchamber, Lady Violet's room, and the passage between." Brackett bowed and led the way. The corridor outside was wide, with a runner of dark carpet and portraits, which loomed in the foggy light like stern witnesses. Holmes walked softly, his head slightly inclined, as if listening to the boards beneath. I kept close behind him with Lady Violet, who was visibly trembling but resolute. Sir Alister's room opened next to the sitting-room, separated from it by a narrow antechamber which held a dressing-stand and a tall wardrobe. The bedchamber itself was in order, the bed turned down, the washstand undisturbed, a small pile of clothes upon a chair. Holmes barely glanced at these. He knelt, instead, at the threshold, examined the skirting, and then the door hinge. "Locked from within last night?" he asked. "Yes, sir," said Brackett. "The footman forced it when her ladyship called. The key was on the inside." Holmes nodded and ran his fingers over the lock plate with the air of a man feeling the grain of wood. His eyes travelled to the hearth. The fire there was black and dead, unlike the red core in the sitting-room. "You light no fire here at night?" "His lordship preferred the sitting-room for his reading, sir." Holmes stepped into the antechamber and opened the wardrobe. It was mostly full of coats and hunting clothes. He did not rummage. He only looked at the bottom. Then he closed it as quietly as he had opened it, and moved on. Lady Violet's chamber was across the corridor, faced by a little alcove with a window that looked upon the garden. Her room was in some disorder, as a woman's may be when shaken by catastrophe. A medicine bottle lay upon the dressing table, her brushes were scattered, and on the floor beside the bed I observed a dark velvet wrapper crumpled as if fallen from a chair. Holmes's eyes went to it immediately. He stooped and lifted it by the hem. "Did you wear this last night, madam?" "Yes. After I left my husband, I was cold." He laid it over his arm and examined the collar and cuffs. "No blood," he remarked. Then very gently, "May I see the pillow upon which you slept?" She pointed mutely. Holmes lifted it, turned it, and studied the surface beneath. "What do you see, Watson?" I bent over. There were a few short, dark hairs on the linen, and a faint smear, as from damp fingers, along the edge, nothing more that I could discern. "Only the common disarray of a bed," said I. Holmes smiled faintly, as one smiles at a well-meant child. "And yet there is not the common imprint of a head. Observe, the pillow is scarcely depressed. Lady Violet did not lie here for any length of time." Violet clutched at the bedpost. I went to bed. I remember sitting here. I remember nothing after." Holmes's manner softened again. Yet beneath it I sensed the fixed purpose of a hound on scent. "You remember sitting here at what hour?" "Near 10, perhaps a little after." "I dismissed Hannah. I was upset. I wished to be alone." "Did you take anything? Laudanum, perhaps, for your nerves?" Her lips parted. "I have, on occasion, but not last night. At least, I do not think so." Holmes turned and picked up the medicine bottle from the dressing table. He sniffed it, held it to the light. "Chloral hydrate," said he, "a sleeping draught. When last used?" 2 nights ago." He set it down and walked to the door. His gaze rested for a moment on the handle, then dropped to the carpet within the threshold. Again I saw that faint rust-brown smudge, thinner in this room, as if a trail had begun here and grown stronger towards the sitting room. Holmes' fingers brushed it once. Blood, but not fresh. It has been wiped. He straightened and looked to Brackett. Who cleans these floors in the morning? The maids, sir. They do the corridors at 6. But none went into the private rooms. Holmes' eyes were distant. No, of course not. He turned to me. Watson, you noticed a wrapper on the floor. There is no sign of her ladyship wearing it to bed. There is chloral in the house. There is a bruise at the base of the skull. What conclusion suggests itself to you? That she was struck and rendered unconscious before she could lie down, I answered. Precisely, and by whom? By whoever wished to use her as a screen for the murder. Excellent. We are not wholly wasting our morning, then. Lady Violet made a sound between a sob and a gasp. Used me? Mr. Holmes, do you mean to say someone did this to me? That I was not— He lifted a hand. I say only that the facts do not yet point to your guilt. Let us continue to follow them. We had returned to the corridor when a footfall hurried towards us. Lestrade appeared, his face flushed from quick movement. Mr. Holmes, a word. We've questioned the servants. No one admits to leaving their rooms after 10, but Carter, the footman, swears he saw a light under the study door at 11:30. That's not uncommon, for Sir Alistair often read late. Only, here's the rub. He says he heard a woman speaking in a low voice. Not loud enough to catch words, but he's sure of it. Holmes's eyes sharpened like steel catching sun. A woman's voice in the study at 11:30, and the door unlatched this morning, and lace in his hand. Interesting. Kettering, who had followed us into the corridor, broke in hoarsely. There was no woman in his room. I would have known. Holmes regarded him steadily. Would you? Captain, what did you do after leaving Sir Alistair at 11? I went to my room. It is at the front. I read for a time, then slept. You did not walk again? No. Holmes nodded as if accepting it, yet I saw that he had not truly looked away from Kettering's face the entire time the soldier spoke. And Mr. Graves? Asked Holmes suddenly. Lestrade jerked his head. The secretary, he's in the morning room, shaken to bits, says he was working in his own quarters until 10, then to bed, claims he heard nothing. Bring him to me, said Holmes calmly, and also the maid Hannah, one at a time, if you please. Lestrade hesitated, then obeyed, for it was the habit of men to obey Holmes once they had begun. As the inspector went, Holmes walked to the alcove window and stood looking out upon the garden. The fog had thinned in faint patches, and through it I could see the wet black earth of the borders and the pale skeletons of rose bushes. Along the gravel path below, a series of footprints ran from the back steps towards the shrubbery, deep heel marks that betrayed haste. Holmes's finger lifted slightly, pointing, though he said nothing. Then he turned to me with that abrupt change which always meant the next move was already chosen. Watson, said he very low, there has been a nocturnal visitor to this house, possibly more than one, and the person who left those prints carried something heavy, and not in peace. We are close upon the first real turn of the case. Keep your eyes open and your mind shut to nothing. A faint rattle sounded from below, followed by the soft opening and shutting of a door. Then footsteps ascended the stairs with the uncertain cadence of someone who walks in a dream. Lestrade reappeared and beckoned to us into the morning room, a bright apartment at the front, whose 3 tall windows looked upon the street. The curtains had been drawn back to admit what daylight there was, yet the fog still dulled it, so that the room had the pallor of an aquarium. A coal fire burned briskly, and upon a sofa sat a man whom I recognized at once as the secretary, Lionel Graves. He was of middle height and spare build, with a thin, anxious face in which earnestness struggled with fear. His hands were so restless that even as we entered he rubbed them together as though to warm them, though the room was not cold. He rose hastily when Holmes came in. "Mr. Holmes, Inspector, Dr. Watson, I am at your disposal," said he in a voice that quavered despite an evident attempt at composure. Holmes inclined his head. "Pray sit down, Mr. Graves. I shall not keep you longer than is necessary for truth. You have heard of Sir Alister's death?" Graves' face twisted. "I found out at 8. It is monstrous. I cannot believe it. He was more than an employer." "Indeed. The more reason, then, for precision. You were in the house last night?" "Yes." "Your quarters?" "On the second floor near the library." "At what hour did you last see Sir Alister alive?" "Just before 10. I took him some papers he wished to review. He was in the sitting room, by the fire, as usual." "In what temper did he appear?" Graves hesitated. "Disturbed. Angrier than I have known him. He had received a letter earlier, one that upset him greatly." Holmes' eyes held a quiet, searching interest. "Did you see the letter?" "No. He put it away the moment I came in, but he spoke of it." "What did he say?" "That it was an impertinent communication. He used those words. He said, 'They think to frighten me, Graves, but I have stared down worse than ink on paper.' He seemed almost contemptuous, but behind it there was agitation." "Did he name the writer?" "No." "Did he say they?" Holmes's voice sharpened by half a degree. "Plural?" "Yes, I thought nothing of it." He might have meant the opposition or some committee. You know how men speak in irritation. Holmes nodded as if satisfied, yet I saw his fingers tap once upon the mantel. "You left him at 10, and then?" "I went to my room. I had correspondence to finish. I worked perhaps half an hour. Then I went to bed." "You heard nothing afterwards? No voice? No step?" "Nothing. I slept soundly." Holmes' gaze drifted to the man's hands. "You have ink on your thumb, Mr. Graves." The secretary looked at it with a startled air. "Yes, this morning. When the inspector questioned me, I was writing a note." "Ah, and last night? Did you write also?" "Yes, I told you so." "Then it is curious you have no stain on the right forefinger, which is where a man of your habit holds his pen. Only a slight abrasion, as if the skin had been rubbed by something hard." Holmes leaned nearer, still polite, unhurried. "May I see your right hand?" Graves flushed. "Certainly." He held it out, palm up. On the forefinger, just above the knuckle, was a shallow scrape, red and raw. "You received that last night?" Yes, I suppose so. I shut a drawer on my hand. It is nothing." "It is seldom nothing," said Holmes softly. "A drawer, you say? In your room?" "Yes." "How inconvenient of it to bite you only upon the forefinger." Graves snatched the hand back as though stung in spirit now rather than flesh. His eyes darted to Lestrade, who watched him with growing suspicion. Holmes's voice remained mild. "I do not accuse you, Mr. Graves. I only collect. Tell me, did Sir Alister keep a duplicate key to the sitting room?" "The sitting room? I do not know. He was careful with keys." "Did you ever see him lock the door from within?" "Many times." "And at 10 last night, did he lock it after your departure?" "I cannot say. The door was open as I left. He had not yet shut it." Holmes nodded again. "Very good. One more question. In your work for Sir Alister, you handled many of his private papers. Were you aware of any matter which might bring a woman to his room at 11:30? Graves stared as if the question had struck him like a thrown object. "A woman? I know of no such thing. Sir Alistair was not. He was a man of honour. "Honour and women are not always sworn enemies," said Holmes, "but you know nothing." "Nothing." Holmes rose. "Thank you. That will do for now. Inspector, keep Mr. Graves at hand. I shall likely need him again." The secretary bowed stiffly, but as he passed me I caught a glimpse of something behind his composure. Relief, yes, but also resentment, as if Holmes had trod upon a tender pride. Lestrade, once Graves had gone, muttered between his teeth, "He's hiding something, I'll swear it. That scratch—" "Hush," said Holmes with the faintest trace of impatience. "You observe too much and conclude too soon. A dangerous combination. Now bring me the maid." Hannah came in almost at once, for she had been waiting in the passage. She was a comely young woman in a black dress, hastily pinned on, her cheeks blotched with crying. Yet there was an honesty in her blue eyes that at once inclined me to sympathy. "You are Lady Violet's maid?" said Holmes. "Yes, sir." "You found her ladyship this morning?" "On the floor outside her room, sir. She was white as death and her hair all about her, and there was blood on her hands. I screamed. Mr. Brackett came, and then the footman." "Why were you there at 7? Does her ladyship ring for you?" "No, sir. I go to her at 7 each morning." "You heard nothing in the night?" "Not a whisper. I sleep in the next room. If there had been a cry, I'd have been up like a shot." Holmes' glance was swift and penetrating. "You are a light sleeper?" "Yes, sir. Always have been." "And you went to bed when?" "After I undressed her ladyship. That was about 10, maybe a bit after. She was in a terrible state, crying. I offered to stay, but she sent me away." "Did her ladyship take a draught?" "No, sir. I brought her a glass of water. She said she wanted no medicine." "Did you see Sir Alistair after 10? "No." "Any person pass your door?" Hannah shook her head. Holmes walked slowly to the window and looked down into the street for a moment before turning back. "Hannah, you are fond of your mistress?" "Oh, yes, sir. She's the kindest lady. I'd lay down my life for her." "I believe you. Then if you are to help clear her, you must tell me everything without fear. Did you ever see a garment of lace, such as this in the house?" He produced the folded handkerchief from his pocket and showed her the scrap. Hannah's eyes fixed upon it. For a second her mouth opened, then she shut it again, biting her lip. I don't know, sir." "Look carefully." She looked. Her face turned a shade paler than before. "Well," Holmes' voice was quiet but inexorable. It's like the trim on a ladyship's red gown," she whispered. Lady Violet, who had remained near the door, gave a little cry. "My red gown! Hannah, what nonsense!" Hannah turned helplessly. "Begging your pardon, my lady. The gown you wore at the Hunt Ball last month, the crimson velvet with white lace at the throat. I mended a tear in it myself. The lace is the same pattern. I'd swear it." Holmes' eyes remained on Hannah, but his words were for us all. "Your ladyship owns a crimson velvet gown trimmed with lace. Where is it now?" "In my wardrobe. I have not worn it since the ball." "Then we shall have it brought at once." Lady Violet pressed a hand to her forehead. "Mr. Holmes, why do you ask this? Surely you cannot suspect me because I own a gown?" "I suspect no one because they own anything," said he. "Only because objects move, and men and women move with them. Hannah, did you see the crimson gown last night?" "No, sir." "Did you lay it out?" "No, it's in the cedar press. I haven't touched it in weeks." Holmes's face was expressionless, but I knew that behind it something had clicked into place. He turned to Lestrade. "Inspector, send Brackett to fetch the crimson gown at once and tell the constables at the back to watch the garden path. No one is to approach the shrubbery area. I shall go down there with Dr. Watson now." Lestrade stared. "The garden?" What have you seen?" Holmes's thin smile returned. "Footprints, my dear Lestrade. And when there are footprints leaving a house at midnight, it is generally because something or someone has been carried out that was not carried out in daylight." We descended by the back stair and passed through a narrow servants' corridor which smelt of beeswax and boiled linen. A maid, pale at the sight of us, drew back from her pail as if fearful she might be questioned next. Brackett had gone ahead to carry out Holmes's order, and the sound of his brisk tread echoed faintly from above. Holmes moved with that quick, noiseless certainty which made me feel in such moments that he belonged as much to the shadows as to the daylight. He did not speak until we had reached the back door and stepped out upon the stone terrace. The fog was thinner here, broken by the damp breath of the garden. The lawn lay before us like a sheet of dim green silk, bordered by black shrubs whose wet leaves glistened faintly. A gravel path ran down the centre and forked near a low hedge towards a small summer house half hidden in vapour. Upon this path were the marks Holmes had shown me from above. 2 clear impressions of boots close together, deeply bitten into the wet gravel at the heel, shallower at the toe, as if the walker had borne weight and leaned back to steady it. Holmes squatted without ceremony, his coat-tails spreading on the damp stone, and inspected the tracks with his lens. "A man's boots," said he, "size 7 or 8, worn at the outer edge, so he is slightly pigeon-toed. He walks fast, and last night he walked faster. Observe the drag here where his foot slipped. There was haste, perhaps even a stumble." "And the weight you spoke of?" Holmes pointed with a long forefinger. "See how the heels are driven twice as deep on the return as on the outward path. He went out light, he came back heavy. Yet there is no second set of prints beside him, therefore the weight was carried, not accompanied." "A body?" I asked. He glanced up quickly. "Possibly, or something which he wished to conceal as carefully as a body. Let us follow." We moved along the path. At the fork, the prints turned left, towards the line of shrubbery. The ground here was softer, and the impressions clearer. In several places I could see the faint scrape of something dragged or swung low, an irregular groove in the damp gravel that ran beside the heel marks. Holmes's mouth tightened. "Yes," said he softly, "something awkward to carry." The shrubs ahead were thick laurels and yews grown high and close to screen the garden from the neighbouring lane. A narrow gap between 2 bushes showed a darker, trodden earth beneath. Holmes bent and parted the leaves. The soil was churned as if by a knee and a boot. There was also upon one glossy leaf at shoulder height a tiny smear of dried rust brown. Holmes sniffed it, then touched it with the corner of his handkerchief. "Blood again. We are on the right road." He ducked into the gap. I followed, my coat catching on the wet branches. Within was a cramped little space between hedge and wall, used perhaps for storing garden tools in summer. The ground was strewn with dead leaves and a few broken twigs. Holmes went down on one knee, raked the leaves aside with swift, delicate fingers, and exposed a patch of bare earth. In it was the clear imprint of a small object, curved and edged. He rose and with the same care began to search along the wall. Presently he drew out of a tangle of roots something that made my heart turn cold despite my profession. It was a short iron bar, perhaps 10 inches long, thick at one end, and the heavier end was darkly stained and clotted. "The weapon," said Holmes simply. I took it from him and examined it. The weight was all in the head. One swing of such a bar could have crushed a skull like an eggshell. The blood upon it was dry, but unmistakable. "So he was struck with something after all," I murmured. "Yes," and the weapon was carried out and hidden in the garden by the same hand that wished to mislead us as to its existence. Note, Watson, that it was not thrown far, only placed where a hasty search might miss it, that tells of a mind quick enough to act but pressed for time. We were still by the shrubbery when footsteps crunched behind us. Lestrade came rapidly down the path, his bowler hat pulled low, his face excited. "Well," he cried, "what have you got?" Holmes stepped aside so that the inspector could see the iron bar. Lestrade whistled. "Good Lord, so there was a weapon. Why the devil didn't we find it?" "Because you looked in the room for what was not in the room," said Holmes, "and because the murderer had the advantage of you in knowledge of the house. It is fortunate you did not insist on gathering the gardeners as suspects. Their spades would not have made so neat a print." Lestrade crouched and peered at the earth. "You say this was carried out last night. By whom?" Holmes did not answer directly. He looked up at the high hedge and the wall beyond. "This gap has been used before. See the broken twigs, old and new, and the packed soil. It is a private path to the lane. One can enter or leave the grounds here without passing the gates." Lestrade's eyes widened. "Then an outsider could have come in?" "An outsider could have come in, but he would need to know of the gap, and to have the nerve to use it at night. There are only 3 classes of men who walk through laurel hedges at midnight: those who belong to the house, those who have visited it, and those who are mad. Our man is not mad." I could see the inspector's thoughts racing down their own straight line. Captain Kettering knew the house, Graves knew it, the servants knew it. Quite so. And Carter heard a woman's voice in the study at 11:30, and Sir Alistair had lace in his hand. It begins to look like a rendezvous gone wrong. "It begins to look like several things," said Holmes dryly. "But we are not yet done with the garden. There is more written here." He moved a little farther along the wall and stopped at a low iron drain pipe. At its base, half concealed by leaves, lay something white. Holmes plucked it out between finger and thumb and held it to the light. A fragment of lace. It was larger than the one Lady Violet had brought, and the torn edge matched a pattern of scallops. One corner was spotted with the same dark, dried red. Lestrade gave a low exclamation. "Another piece?" Holmes nodded. "Torn here. The other piece torn from it and clutched by the dead man. Therefore the lace was torn in this spot. Therefore the struggle, or at least the contact, occurred here, not in the sitting room." "But the body was in the chair." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Exactly. The body was placed in the chair. Sir Alistair was struck here either before or after the lace was torn and carried back inside. That is why the return footprints are heavy." Lestrade stared from the lace to the iron bar and back again. "You'll have me believing he was murdered in the garden and moved into his own room without a sound." "Not without a sound, perhaps," said Holmes, "only without a sound that reached any ear we have yet questioned. The fog muffles more than streets, Inspector. It muffles common sense, too. Let us go in." We returned at once to the house, Holmes leading with the lace folded in his palm. In the corridor above we met Brackett coming towards us, his face solemn and his arms burdened with a long cedar-wood box. "The gown, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes opened the lid upon the hall table. There lay a rich crimson velvet dress, its colour startling even in the grey air, like a smear of wine upon snow. The bodice was trimmed at throat and sleeves with white lace. Holmes bent over it, and without removing it fully, examined the lace. At the left side of the collar there was a jagged gap. The torn edge was fresh and uneven. He looked up at Lady Violet, who had come down behind Brackett, her eyes wide with dread and bewilderment. "Madam," said he very quietly, "your gown has been torn since last you wore it." She swayed, clutching at the banister. "It cannot be. I have not touched it. Hannah would have seen—" Hannah, who hovered near the door, gave a choked cry and covered her mouth. Holmes did not press her yet. He only held the gown closer to the light, then reached into his pocket and took out the smaller piece of lace. With practiced fingers he laid its torn edge against the gap in the collar. It fitted as a key fits a lock. A silence fell so deep that I could hear the faint tick of a clock in the library beyond. Lestrade drew a slow breath. Then her ladyship's gown was worn last night. Holmes' gaze shifted from the lace to the bruise on Lady Violet's head, then to her pale, astonished face. "Worn," said he, "or used?" For a few seconds no one spoke. The crimson of the velvet seemed to glow more fiercely for the pallor of the faces bent above it, and the little torn gap at the collar stared up at us like a mute accusation. Lady Violet had gone utterly still. She looked less like a woman confronted with a clue than one confronted with her own ghost. "It is not possible," she said at last, very low, very steadily. "The gown has not left that box since September." Holmes closed the lid softly as though he feared to disturb some sleeping thing within. "Yet the lace has left it, madam. We must reconcile those two statements." Lestrade, with the abruptness of a man who sees his case forming, stepped forward. "Lady Violet, I don't wish to pain you, but you must tell us if you wore this last night. The evidence—" Holmes checked him with an upraised hand. "Inspector, if you will be good enough to restrain yourself, you may yet save the lady from the gallows which your zeal is so anxious to construct. Her ladyship has already told us she remembers nothing after 10. It is precisely her memory that is at issue." He turned to Hannah, who was trembling like a leaf in a draught. "Hannah, you say you mended a tear in this lace at the hunt ball. When did you last see the gown?" "2 days ago, sir. I aired the cedar press." "The gown was whole then, I'd swear it." Holmes's head inclined slightly. "Then the tear is fresh. It was made within 48 hours, most likely last night. Now, answer me carefully. When you undressed her ladyship, did you remove any other garment from her besides her wrapper and underthings?" Hannah swallowed. "No, sir. Only what she wore that evening, a black dinner gown." "And when she went to bed?" "I pinned up her hair, as I always do, and left her sitting by the fire in her room." "You did not afterward return to check on her?" "No, sir." Holmes's gaze shifted to Lady Violet. "Madam, is there any other woman in this house to whom this gown would fit?" Violet looked at him in bewilderment. "Fit? What do you mean?" "Could Hannah or another maid have worn it?" She drew herself up faintly. "Certainly not. The gowns are locked in my press. No servant would dare." "Nevertheless, servants are human. Humans sometimes dare. But we need not dwell upon that yet. There is another possibility." Holmes's voice grew so gentle that I understood he meant to tread upon ground tender to her pride. "You have said you quarrelled with your husband. May I ask the nature of those quarrels? Were they domestic only, or had you reason to suspect him of some attachment elsewhere?" A slow flush rose in spite of her pallor. "Mr. Holmes, you ask too much." "I ask only what may spare you shame later. If there was a woman connected to Sir Alistair's affairs, even by rumour, it is essential I hear of her now." Lady Violet's hands twisted in her veil. "There was no woman. I would have known it. He was stern, yes, and proud. But he was not faithless." Holmes bowed slightly, as if he accepted her word without question. "Very well, then we proceed without it." Lestrade broke in impatiently. "Proceed where? The lace is hers, the gown is hers. The dead man clutched it. To my mind it's as plain as print. She went to meet him in the garden after a quarrel, there was a struggle, and in the confusion she was hit herself. Forgot. It's a tragedy. But Tragedy is not proof, said Holmes sharply, nor is your imagination evidence. You are so fond of the obvious, Lestrade, that you will cling to it even when it contradicts itself. Consider for one moment, if Lady Violet murdered her husband and wished to conceal it, would she hide the lace scrap and bring it to me? Would she ring you to find him? Would she place herself unconscious outside her own door where a maid might stumble upon her before the body was discovered? The facts do not support your melodrama. Lestrade's mouth opened, shut again. He looked abashed but unconvinced. Holmes stepped aside and drew me with him towards the alcove window, where we could speak without the others catching more than the murmur of our words. "Watson," said he in a low voice, "you observed the bruise. What is your opinion as to its cause and time?" It was made by a blunt object, a fist perhaps, or the corner of something heavy. Judging by the swelling and discoloration, it could have been inflicted anywhere between midnight and 2 or 3 o'clock. It is fresh. Exactly. She was struck after Sir Alistair's death, not before it. If she had been felled at 10, the swelling would show more purple by 7. Therefore her collapse did not occur at the start of events, but near their close. He glanced towards her slender figure with a thoughtfulness that was almost tender. She was disposed of. Disposed of? Placed out of the way, she served the murderer as a final convenience. He turned back to the hall table where the cedar box rested. His fingers went to the lock. It was a simple brass affair, but he examined its keyhole minutely. "Brackett," said he, "who keeps the key to her ladyship's cedar press?" "The key hangs in her ladyship's dressing-room, sir. Only she and Hannah have access." Holmes nodded. "So it should. But keys, my dear Brackett, are like reputations. They may be copied by those who are patient enough." He straightened. "There is one man in this house whose work makes patience and copying his daily bread." Lestrade's head jerked up. "Graves!" Holmes did not answer. He was already moving towards the morning room. "Bring Mr. Graves to me again, if you please, and Captain Kettering as well." They were fetched quickly. Graves entered pale and stiff, his eyes darting to the cedar box. Kettering followed with the same controlled heaviness as before, but there was now a hard glitter in his glance when it fell upon the gown. Holmes addressed the secretary first. "Mr. Graves, you said Sir Alistair received a letter yesterday which disturbed him. Do you know what became of it?" Graves moistened his lips. "No." "You were certain? You did not see it again?" "No." Holmes took from his pocket the tin case with the burnt fragment. He opened it on the hall table. Within lay a half-consumed corner of heavy paper, blackened at the edge, but still legible in part. "I could make out a few words in a bold hand, if you would spare her," and lower down, "Meet me by the laurels." Graves gave a start so violent that he could not disguise it. Holmes's eyes were upon him like a vice. "You recognize the hand?" Graves' face had gone grey. I have seen it before. Sir Alistair kept pamphlets from his constituents. It might be any—" "It is not any. It is the hand of a woman, and an educated one. Large, decisive strokes, but with the tremor of emotion. Sir Alistair burned it in his sitting-room last night. Why? Because it threatened him, or because it begged him?" Graves' composure cracked. Sweat beaded at his temple. "Mr. Holmes, I know nothing of it, I swear it." Holmes shut the case softly. "We shall see. Now, Captain Kettering." He turned with a swiftness that made the soldier blink. "You were with Sir Alistair until near 11. At what time precisely did you leave him?" Kettering hesitated. "I told you about 11. "About is a convenient word. I ask precisely." The captain's jaw set. 10:45. And when you left, was he alone? Kettering's eyes flicked for the first time towards Lady Violet. Yes. Holmes let a silence grow, as if he wished the man to hear his own heartbeat. Captain, you were in Afghanistan with Sir Alistair. You have seen death and the shapes men make to avoid it. You are not the sort to be startled by a scrap of lace, yet you were startled when you saw the first piece. Why? Colour rose like a slow tide under the captain's tan. Because it was unexpected. Unexpected because you had not thought it left behind, or because you had not thought it would be recognised. Kettering took a step forward. Mr. Holmes, this is an outrage. I've lost my dearest friend. Then help me catch his murderer. Holmes's voice cracked like a whip. Who wore the crimson gown last night? For one instant, I thought Kettering would strike him. His hand clenched. The old wound in it seemed to tighten. Then something in Holmes's gaze, cold, commanding, almost pitiful, held him. He looked away with a strangled sound. I don't know, he said hoarsely. Holmes drew a slow breath. Very good. Then I will find out without your help. He turned to Lestrade. Inspector, you will keep Graves and Kettering under discreet watch. No arrest, yet. I require the freedom of their tongues. Lestrade began to protest, then checked himself at Holmes's look. And now, said Holmes, taking up his hat, there is one person still unexamined and one place still unsearched. If my reasoning is not at fault, both will answer each other. Watson, come with me to the second floor. We will pay a visit to Mr. Graves's drawers, since they have been so eager to shut upon his hand. It was near noon when we reached Mr. Graves' quarters. The second-floor corridor was empty, save for a frightened housemaid who retreated before Holmes' advancing figure, as if his very purpose were a contagion. Lestrade followed us with an unwilling, expectant air. He had not forgiven the check to his obvious theory, yet his professional curiosity had him by the throat. Graves's sitting room and bedroom formed a modest suite overlooking the front drive. The secretary, pale and silent under the constable's eye, stood aside while Holmes, with a quiet courtesy that was more terrible than any rudeness, entered and shut the door behind him. "Thank you, Mr. Graves," said he. "You need not assist. You may only answer." He went first to the desk, where papers lay in anxious disarray, as though their owner had sought in them a refuge and found only more peril. Holmes's long fingers moved among them without haste. From one drawer he brought out a small tin of sealing wax, in which the rim bore a fresh, soft distortion. From another, a narrow strip of metal, the size and curve of a key blank. He set these on the table without comment. Next he crossed to a washstand. Upon the shelf, half hidden behind a shaving brush, stood a small bottle, the label of which had been torn away. Holmes uncorked it, sniffed, and handed it to me. "Chloral," I said. Lestrade made a sound deep in his throat. "Sleeping draught. Then the lady—" "Was dulled by it," said Holmes. "Yes, we shall come to that. Now the drawer that bit you, Mr. Graves." The secretary's mouth opened, but no words came. Holmes bent, not to the desk, but to a low chest by the bed. Its handle showed a faint smear of something dark. The lock plate was scraped where a key had been turned often and quickly. Holmes drew it open. Within lay a pair of boots, a heavy greatcoat, and, folded beneath them, a dark garment of velvet crimson as a fresh wound. Lestrade sprang forward. "By heaven!" Holmes lifted the velvet between forefinger and thumb. "Not a lady's gown, Watson, merely the skirt portion, detached from its bodice." "Someone has cut it away for convenience. Observe the stitching, rough, hurried, done by a man who is no seamstress." He held it to the light. but it is of the same velvet and dye as Lady Violet's hunt ball gown. The rest has been returned to the cedar press to keep up appearances." Graves swayed, gripping the bedpost. Holmes did not look at him. He had knelt to the boots now, turning them over. The soles were wet still at their edges, and in the heel iron there clung a grey grit that looked to me most like garden gravel. The outer halves were worn more than the inner. "Pigeon-toed," murmured Holmes. "Size 7, exactly so." Lestrade's face had set like plaster. "You mean he—" Holmes rose and faced Graves at last. "Mr. Graves, your work has been clever, but you have erred in two things. You have underestimated London gravel, and you have overestimated your own nerve." Graves licked lips that had gone bloodless. "Mr. Holmes, this is madness. Those things you have no right—" "You will find your rights precisely where you left Sir Alistair," said Holmes very quietly. "But I do not wish you to rant. I wish you, for your own sake, to listen. I shall tell this company what happened last night, and you will correct me if I stray from truth." He drew a chair forward and sat, the velvet in one hand, the scrap of lace in the other. In the hush that followed, even the house seemed to lean in to hear him. "Yesterday morning you received, in your capacity as secretary, a letter intended for Sir Alistair. It was from a woman, educated, desperate, begging him to spare her from some ruin and naming a meeting by the Laurels. You withheld it from your employer until you had copied its contents, because it threatened not him, but you. The woman was Miss Eleanor Ray." At the name, Graves gave a little choking noise. "She is your wife, or all but, and her brother is in prison at your persuasion," Holmes went on. "You led her to believe that Sir Alistair, by some act of his, could procure the man's release. In truth, the only man who could do so was you, for you were the one who had engineered the accusation. You needed her brother out of the way because he knew of your forgeries." Lestrade's eyes widened. "Forgeries?" Holmes nodded. "For 2 years you have signed Sir Alistair's name to papers he never saw, introductions, loans, subtle little transfers in the shadow of politics. You have grown rich on another man's honour. Yesterday, Sir Alistair learned enough to suspect it. He wrote to confront you. You forestalled him by directing Miss Ray to a clandestine meeting instead. 'Meet me by the Laurels,' you wrote in the bold hand of a woman, for you knew a woman's entreaty would lure him where a man's threat might fail." Graves' voice came out in a whisper. "You cannot prove—" "I am not yet finished." Holmes's eyes were like winter water. "You knew Sir Alistair's affection for his wife was of a jealous sort. You knew, too, the secret gap in the shrubbery by which one might enter unseen. Earlier in the day you made a duplicate key of Lady Violet's cedar press. Here is the key blank. Here the wax mould. At 10, when Lady Violet retired, you moved through the house under the pretence of papers, took the crimson gown, and cut away its skirt to wear over your own clothes. With a veil pulled low and the velvet about you, you were, in the dimness of fog, a lady enough. Carter heard a woman's voice in the study at 11:30, because the woman was you, speaking low to excite Sir Alistair's suspicion and draw him to the garden." Lestrade glanced involuntarily towards me. I could only stare, for the audacity of it held me breathless. In the garden by the Laurels you met Sir Alistair. He thought he found his wife or some assignation connected with her, and in the shock of it he caught at your collar. He tore the lace. You struck him with the iron bar you had taken from the tool shed. He fell where we found the blood and the second scrap of lace. You had not intended to move him far, but the house was still. You feared a cry might wake servants, so you hauled him back, alone, heavy in your arms, along the path, leaving the deep return prints and the drag mark beside them. Holmes lifted the lace fragment. He died, clenching this because to his last moment he believed he was struggling with a woman. You carried him into the sitting room, set him in his chair, and dashed blood upon the wall to suggest a blow delivered there. Then you locked his bedroom door from within, using the key you later returned through the antechamber, and left the sitting room door unlatched so that others might think it had never been secured. But still you had a difficulty. Lady Violet. She might wake, she might remember the quarrel, she might suspect your movements. So you slipped chloral into the water carafe in her room hours earlier, knowing she would drink in her distress. She did so, became drowsy, and sat by her fire until sleep stole over her without her reaching the bed. When you were done with the body, you entered her room, removed any trace of velvet upon yourself, and struck her a careful blow at the base of her skull, enough to deepen her stupor, not enough to kill. You loosed her hair to heighten the appearance of disorder, smeared her hands with the blood you had taken in upon your cuffs, and laid her outside her door to be found. The scrap of lace you placed in Sir Alister's hand would point to her gown, her bruised head and blank memory would do the rest. You hid the iron bar in the shrubbery and burned the letter that had brought him to his death. He rose smoothly. There, Mr. Graves, is your night's work. Is there a thread in it you can deny? For a heartbeat, the secretary stood rigid, his eyes enormous in his ashen face. Then whatever dam of pride or fear had held him broke, and he sank into the chair with a convulsive shudder. "It was to be stopped," he whispered. "You don't know what he'd have done to me. 2 years of labour, of service, thrown away because he chose to play the saint. And Eleanor, she would have betrayed me. I had to silence them both, only I never meant to strike him so hard. He sprang at me like a madman. I saw his eyes. I saw his hand at my throat." Lestrade stepped forward, the handcuffs already in his fist. "That's enough. You're under arrest for the murder of Sir Alister St. Clare." Graves did not resist. He looked for one dreadful moment towards the staircase, as if he could see beyond it to the world he had lost. Then his shoulders slumped, and he let himself be led away. When the door had closed upon him, Lady Violet gave a long, sobbing breath which seemed to empty her of all remaining strength. I sprang to her, but Holmes was before me, steadying her with a gentleness almost brotherly. "It is over, madam," said he. "You have been wronged, not guilty." She looked up at him through tears. "I owe you my life." He shook his head. "You owe me nothing. I did only what any man must when a lie is dressed in crimson and calls itself truth." That evening, when we sat again by our own fire in Baker Street, I ventured to remark upon the singular daring of the disguise. "It was the voice that misled us longest," I admitted. "I had not thought a man could counterfeit it so." Holmes smiled wearily. A low voice behind a door, a fog in a garden, and a husband's jealousy. 3 allies are enough for many a villain. Graves relied on the world's habit of thinking a velvet skirt must contain a woman. But a clue is not what a thing is, it is what a thing does. The lace did not say violet, it said someone wore Violet's velvet there. And the footprint said the wearer was a man. He leaned back, his fingers steepled, the old reflective look returning. "There is a moral in it somewhere, Watson," said he. "Perhaps that the most dangerous widow is the one a man makes for himself. Or perhaps only that when people set traps they are very apt to blunder into them." And with that, as though the whole grim business were already filed away among the curiosities of his mind, he reached for his violin. The first thin searching notes rose into the lamplit room, and outside our windows the London fog rolled on, indifferent to guilt and innocence alike.